The cold barrel of a suppressed pistol pressed against the back of Elena Van Hout's neck, the metal biting into her skin like ice. She didn't scream. She didn't even blink. After 10 years of running, of changing her name, of scrubbing her fingerprints from the digital world, the shadows had finally caught up. But it wasn't the fear of death that made her heart race, it was the scent filling the narrow, rain-slicked alleyway. Sandalwood and expensive tobacco. A scent that belonged to a ghost. 10 years, Elena, a voice rasped, vibrating through her spine. It was deeper than she remembered, weathered by command and cruelty, yet it carried an ache that shattered her composure. You stayed hidden for 3,652 days. Did you really think I'd stop counting? Elena's breath hitched, her lungs burning in the damp soul air. She knew that voice. It belonged to the man who had once promised to burn the world down just to keep her warm. The man she had betrayed to save his life. Slowly, the man behind her stepped into the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. Dominic Yeo. The undisputed king of the Gurrieo syndicate. The man the underworld called the Ghost, because he had no heart, no mercy, and supposedly, no memory of the woman who had nearly ruined him. But as he lowered the gun, his hand was trembling. Not from weakness, but from a decade of suppressed rage and a love that had turned into a terminal disease. "Look at me," he commanded, his eyes burning with a terrifying mix of obsession and agony. Elena turned, her own eyes filling with tears she had sworn never to shed again. "You were supposed to forget me, Dominic. That was the deal." "I don't make deals with the devil for my soul, Elena. I take what's mine." He stepped closer, his gloved hand gripping her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "And you are the only thing in this world that still belongs to me." Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the channel. I am so incredibly glad you're here to witness this journey of sacrifice, shadows, and a love that refuses to die. Before we dive deeper into the dark world of Dominic and Elena, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments. And how are you all doing? I hope you're ready for an emotional roller coaster. If you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support allows us to keep telling these high-stakes stories of the heart. Now, let's find out if a decade of silence can ever be forgiven. Dominic's grip didn't loosen. In the distance, the sirens of a city that never sleeps wailed, but in this alley, time had stopped. Elena could see the faint scar running along his jawline, a souvenir from the night she disappeared. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had spent 10 years building a quiet life as a florist, a nobody, a ghost among the living. But one look into Dominic's dark, predatory eyes told her the truth. The floral shop, the fake ID, the lonely apartment, it was all over. "Why now?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why find me now?" Dominic leaned in, his lips inches from her ear, his breath hot against her cold skin. "Because the people who forced you to run. I've finally buried the last of them. There's no one left to hide from, Elena. Except me." He pulled back, his expression hardening into a mask of stone. "You have two choices. You walk out of this alley and into my car, or I burn this entire district to the ground just to find the version of you that doesn't want to run anymore." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. He hadn't just found her. He had cleared a path through a decade of blood and war just to stand in front of her. But as she looked at the black SUVs idling at the end of the street, Elena realized the most terrifying thing of all. She didn't want to run. The heavy door of the black sedan clicked shut, sealing Elena into a world she thought she'd escaped forever. The interior smelled of Italian leather and the same suffocating power Dominic had always radiated. Beside her, Dominic sat in silence, his profile silhouetted against the neon blur of Seoul's nightlife. He didn't look at her, but she could feel his awareness of her, a physical weight that made her skin prickle. 10 years ago, Dominic Yeo hadn't been a king. He had been a prince fighting a civil war within his own family. He had been reckless, fueled by a protective streak that made him dangerous. Elena, the daughter of a rival family's accountant, had been his only weakness. To save him from a planned assassination, she had staged her own death, leaking her family's secrets to the police to create a distraction large enough for him to seize power. She had sacrificed her identity to ensure his survival, thinking he would eventually find a woman fit to be a queen. But looking at him now, Elena saw a man carved from ice. His eyes, once capable of warmth when they looked at her, were now hollow pits of calculated intensity. He had become the monster he needed to be to survive, and the guilt of that transformation settled in her stomach like lead. "You're shaking," Dominic said, his voice cutting through the silence. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer comfort. He simply stated it as a tactical observation. "I'm cold," Elena lied, hugging her thin cardigan tighter. "You're lying," he countered smoothly. "You've always been a terrible liar, Elena. It's why I knew you weren't dead the moment I saw the wreckage of that car 10 years ago. There was no wedding ring in the debris. You never took that ring off. Not even to sleep." Elena flinched. She reached for her left hand, her fingers brushing the bare skin where his ring had once Saturday. She had kept it in a velvet pouch under her floorboards for 3,000 days. To hear that he had noticed such a minute detail in the middle of a bloodbath told her everything she needed to know about his obsession. The car pulled into the underground garage of a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city. As the engine died, a man stepped forward to open Dominic's door. He was tall, with a jagged scar across his nose and a posture that screamed military precision. "This is Julian Thorne," Dominic said, stepping out and waiting for Elena. "My right hand. He is the only reason you weren't found 5 years ago. He felt you deserved a little more peace. I almost killed him for it." Julian bowed slightly to Elena, his expression unreadable. "Welcome back, Miss Van Hout." "It's Elena Miller now," she corrected, her voice small. Dominic's jaw tightened. He rounded the car and leaned into her space, his shadow engulfing her. "Not in this house. In this house, you are the woman who belongs to the Yeo name. Everyone else is a fiction." As they walked through the marble halls, Elena saw the life Dominic had built. It was a fortress of gold and glass, beautiful but sterile. There were no photos, no personal touches, except for one thing. At the end of the main gallery sat a massive oil painting. It wasn't of a landscape or a battle. It was a portrait of her, painted from memory, wearing the white dress she had worn the night they met. Elena stopped dead, her breath hitching. "You kept this?" "I kept everything," Dominic whispered, standing behind her. "Every letter you wrote me that I intercepted from the post office you thought was private. Every photograph a private investigator snapped of you buying groceries in Busan, in Daegu, in Incheon. I watched you grow up through a lens, Elena. I watched you mourn a life you thought was over." The realization was a tidal wave. He hadn't just found her today, he had been her silent guardian, or her silent stalker, for a decade. He had watched her struggle, watched her cry, and watched her build a life, all while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Why didn't you come for me sooner?" she whispered, turning to face him. Tears pricked her eyes. "If you knew where I was, if you saw me struggling to pay rent, why did you let me stay alone?" Dominic's hand reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her lower lip. His touch was electric, a spark of the old passion buried under years of resentment. "Because a king doesn't bring his queen into a war zone. I had to kill every man who knew your name. I had to make sure that when I finally brought you home, the only person you had to fear was me." The raw honesty in his voice was terrifying. He had spent 10 years murdering his way to a throne just so he could claim her without a target on her back. He had become a devil to create a heaven for her. "I'm not the girl in that painting anymore, Dominic," she said, her voice trembling. "I've seen too much. I've been alone too long." "Then we will be alone together," he replied, his voice dropping to a low, possessive growl. Before she could respond, Julian reappeared at the end of the hall, his face tight with urgency. "Sir, we have a problem. The council has caught wind of her arrival. They're calling an emergency meeting. They don't think a ghost should be sitting at the head of the table." Dominic didn't look away from Elena. "Let them talk. If they want to challenge the ghost, they can meet the Reaper." He leaned down, his lips brushing her forehead in a gesture that was almost tender, yet felt like a brand. "Go to your room, Elena. Julian will stand guard. Do not try to leave. The sensors are tuned to your heartbeat. If you cross the perimeter, the alarms will alert the entire district." As he turned to leave, his coat billowing behind him like a dark cloud, Elena felt a strange mixture of terror and an old, flickering hope. He was a monster, yes. But he was her monster. Are you the type of person who believes in second chances, even if they come with a price? Let me know in the comments if you think Elena should try to run again or stay and face the fire with Dominic. And if you're enjoying the tension, don't forget to subscribe. The real drama is just beginning. Elena watched him go, the weight of the past 10 years finally crashing down on her. She was back in the gilded cage, but this time, the bars were made of a love so intense it threatened to consume them both. She looked back at the painting, at the innocent girl in the white dress, and realized that girl was truly dead. What stood here now was a woman who knew that in the world of the Mafia, love wasn't a sanctuary, it was a weapon. The morning sun didn't bring warmth to the estate, it only highlighted the sharp edges of Elena's new reality. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her bedroom, watching the black-clad guards patrol the perimeter. She was a guest in name, but a prisoner in practice. Her mind raced with the names of the council, the shadow government of the underworld that Dominic now commanded. If they knew she was alive, she wasn't just a liability, she was a target. A sharp knock at the door startled her. It wasn't Julian. The door swung open to reveal a woman who looked like she was carved from obsidian. She wore a tailored suit and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Elena Van Hout," the woman said, her voice a silky purr. "I'm Clara Thorne, Julian's sister and the lead strategist for the syndicate. Dominic is occupied. He asked me to ensure you were dressed for a guest of your stature." Clara tossed a garment bag onto the bed. Inside was a dress the color of spilled blood. "The council is here. They don't believe Dominic's sudden distraction is worth the risk to our shipments. They think you're a ghost he's chasing. He's going to show them you're very much flesh and bone." "He's using me?" Elena asked, her heart racing. "He's protecting his throne," Clara replied coldly. "In our world, weakness is a death sentence. To him, you are love. To them, you are a loose thread. If you want to survive the next hour, you'll act like a queen, not a victim." Half an hour later, Elena was led down to the grand dining hall. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and the underlying metallic tang of hidden weapons. 12 men sat around a long mahogany table, their faces weathered by decades of crime. At the head of the table sat Dominic, looking every bit the king of shadows. As Elena entered, the room went silent. The men stared, their eyes scanning her for any sign of the girl who had vanished a decade ago. "Gentlemen," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, echoing with a terrifying authority. "You questioned my focus. You questioned why I spent 10 years and billions of one cleaning the streets of our enemies. Meet the reason." A man at the far end, Elder Silas, let out a dry, wheezing laugh. "A girl, Dominic. You risked the syndicate's stability for a woman who ran away. She leaked your father's ledgers to save her own skin. She's a traitor." Dominic's hand moved faster than the eye could follow. A steak knife thudded into the table an inch from Silas's hand, the silver handle vibrating. "She didn't run to save herself," Dominic said, his eyes turning into shards of black glass. "She ran to save me. And the ledgers she leaked. Those were the ones that pointed to the traitors in this room, most of whom are now buried under the Han River." The tension was a physical cord ready to snap. Elena felt the weight of their judgment, the heat of their hatred. But then, she saw it, a subtle movement from the entrance. A man she didn't recognize, dressed in a waiter's uniform, was reaching into his vest. "Dominic!" she screamed. Everything happened in a blur of violence. Dominic didn't look, he lunged across the table, tackling Elena to the floor just as a suppressed gunshot shattered the crystal chandelier above them. Shards of glass rained down like lethal diamonds. Pandemonium erupted. Julian and Clara pulled their weapons, the room filling with the deafening roar of gunfire. Dominic held Elena against his chest, his body acting as a human shield. She could feel the rapid-fire thud of his heart against her back, the only thing in the room that felt real. "Stay down." Dominic roared over the chaos. He rose to one knee, drawing a chrome-plated handgun from his waistband. With 3 clinical, terrifyingly precise shots, He took down the assassin and two of the guards who had hesitated to intervene. The message was clear: there was a mole in his own house. When the smoke cleared, the dining room was a ruin. The assassin lay dead, and the council members were huddled in terror. Dominic stood in the center of the wreckage, his shirt stained with the assassin's blood, looking like a god of war. He turned his gaze toward Elena, who was trembling on the floor, her hands covered in glass dust. But it wasn't fear he saw in her eyes, it was a sudden, sharp realization. The assassin had a tattoo on his wrist. A blue serpent. The Blue Serpent Society, Elena whispered, her voice trembling. Dominic, they were the ones who killed my father. They weren't destroyed 10 years ago. They were waiting. Dominic's face went pale, a rare sight for a man who feared nothing. If they're back, then the leak didn't come from the council. It came from inside my inner circle. He walked over to her, ignoring the elders and the bodies. He reached down, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. The game has changed, Elena. They didn't come to kill me. They came for you. As he carried her out of the room, Elena looked over his shoulder and locked eyes with Julian. For a split second, the stoic bodyguard's mask slipped, revealing a look of pure, unadulterated regret. The first major blow had been dealt. The woman who had been dead for 10 years was now the most hunted person in Seoul, and the only man who could protect her was a boss who might be surrounded by traitors. Have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that turned out to be true? Tell me in the comments if you suspect Julian, or if there's a bigger player in the shadows. And if you're holding your breath, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. Dominic kicked open the door to his private study and set her down on the leather sofa. He locked the door and turned to her, his breathing heavy. They know you're the key, Elena. 10 years ago, you didn't just leak ledgers. You leaked the location of the Serpent's treasury. They've been hunting for the codes ever since. I don't have them, Dominic, she sobbed, the adrenaline finally fading into pure terror. I burned them. I swear. It doesn't matter if you have them or not, Dominic said, kneeling between her legs and grabbing her hands. The world thinks you do. And that means you are never leaving my side again. Not for a second. Do you understand? Elena looked into his eyes and saw the flickering flames of the man he used to be, buried under the ice of the man he was now. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The estate was no longer a palace, it was a pressurized chamber. Every guard's footfall on the marble floors sounded like a countdown. Dominic had moved Elena into his private quarters, the most fortified wing of the mansion, where the walls were reinforced steel and the windows were ballistic glass. For the next 3 days, they lived in a strange, heightened intimacy. Dominic barely slept. He spent his nights hunched over a bank of monitors, his eyes tracing the heat signatures around his perimeter. Elena watched him from the shadows of the bed, her heart aching for the man who was literally losing his mind trying to keep her alive. Eat something, Dominic, she said softly, walking toward him with a tray. She placed a hand on his shoulder, and for a moment, the tension in his muscles snapped. He leaned his head back against her stomach, a rare moment of vulnerability that made her breath hitch. I can't lose you twice, Elena, he rasped, his eyes red-rimmed. The first time nearly broke me. If it happens again, there won't be enough of me left to bury. Elena ran her fingers through his hair, the silence of the room amplifying their shared heartbeat. You won't lose me. But you're fighting a war with a ghost. The Serpent Society. They're always 3 steps ahead. How did they know I was here? Only your inner circle knew. Dominic pulled away, his face hardening. I'm vetting everyone. Julian, Clara, the council. I'm stripping their lives down to the bone. If there's a rat, I'll find them. But until then. He reached into his desk and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. I found this in your old apartment. The one you abandoned 10 years ago. Elena's heart skipped. It was her diary. The one she thought had been burned in the fire that killed her. I read it, Dominic whispered, his voice thick with a mix of guilt and longing. Every page. I read about how much you hated the blood. How you wanted a house with a garden and a porch where we could grow old. I realized that by bringing you back here, I'm giving you the one thing you spent a decade trying to escape. I escaped the violence, Dominic, Elena said, her voice trembling. But I never escaped you. You were in every flower I planted. Every sunset I watched alone. The garden didn't matter if you weren't there to see it. The air between them charged with a sudden, electric heat. Dominic stood up, his tall frame looming over her. The distance between them vanished as he cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away a stray tear. This wasn't the Mafia boss. This was the boy who had loved her in the rain 10 years ago. He kissed her then, a desperate, hungry collision of 10 years of regret and suppressed desire. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and smoke, a vow whispered without words. In that moment, the world outside, the assassins, the traitors, the blood, didn't exist. There was only the heat of his skin against hers. But the moment was shattered by the shrill ring of Dominic's encrypted phone. He pulled away, his jaw tight. "Speak," he barked into the receiver. His expression went from guarded to lethal in a matter of seconds. He looked at Elena, a flash of fear crossing his eyes. "What do you mean, the warehouse was empty? I sent Julian there myself." He hung up, his hands shaking. The shipment of medical supplies for the district. It was intercepted. But it wasn't the serpents. It was the police. Someone tipped them off with my personal signature. "Dominic, that's impossible," Elena said, her mind racing. "Only you have that signature." "And the person who manages my digital encryption," Dominic said, his voice a low growl. "Clara." The rising tension was no longer a slow burn, it was a wildfire. If Clara was the mole, then Julian, the man standing guard at their door, was either a traitor or a victim. Dominic grabbed his jacket, checking his weapon. "I have to handle this. Elena, stay in this room. Do not open the door for anyone but me. I've activated the deadbolt from the inside." "Dominic, wait," she called out, but he was already gone, the heavy steel door slamming shut with an ominous resonance. Left in the suffocating silence, Elena paced the room. Her instincts were screaming. She looked at the monitors Dominic had been watching. One of the camera feeds, the one covering the rear garden, flickered. Then another. And another. Someone was cutting the lines. She ran to the door, pressing her ear against the cold metal. She heard a muffled grunt, the sound of a heavy body hitting the floor, and then, silence. "Julian," she whispered. No answer. Suddenly, a soft scratching sound came from the air vent above the bed. A small, silver canister dropped to the floor, hissing. A thick, sweet-smelling gas began to fill the room. Elena scrambled for the bathroom, trying to find a wet towel, but her limbs felt like they were made of lead. Her vision blurred, the edges of the room spinning into a kaleidoscope of grey. As she collapsed onto the plush rug, the last thing she saw was the steel door sliding open. A pair of polished heels stepped into the room. Not Dominic's boots. Not Julian's tactical shoes. "Sleep well, Queen," a woman's voice whispered. "The serpents have been waiting a long time for their treasury key." Who do you think is really behind the betrayal? Is Clara working alone, or is she just a distraction for a bigger player? Let me know your theories in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to see Elena fight back, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. Elena's eyes closed, the darkness claiming her just as the sound of a distant explosion rocked the estate. The fortress had fallen. The world returned to Elena in fragments of pain and the smell of old stone. Her head throbbed, a rhythmic pounding that matched the dripping of water somewhere in the darkness. As her vision cleared, she realized she wasn't in the mansion anymore. She was in a cold, damp cellar, her wrists bound with heavy zip ties to a rusted metal chair. Finally, a voice echoed. Elena squinted against the harsh glare of a single overhead bulb. Standing in the shadows wasn't Clara. It was Silas, the elder from the council who had laughed at her in the dining hall. Beside him stood Clara, her expression unreadable, and Julian, whose face was bruised and blooded, held at gunpoint by two masked men. "Where is Dominic?" Elena rasped, her throat feeling like it was lined with glass. "Dominic is currently watching his empire burn," Silas said, stepping into the light. He held a tablet, showing live footage of the Yeo estate engulfed in flames. He's a brilliant strategist, but he's a fool for the heart. He thought the serpents were his enemy. He didn't realize that I am the serpent. The revelation felt like a physical blow. Silas, the man who had sat at the right hand of Dominic's father for 30 years, was the leader of the society that had destroyed her family. But that's not the best part, is it, Clara? Silas smiled, a predatory, yellow-toothed grin. Clara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Elena. The encryption signature. Elena. It wasn't mine. It was Dominic's. But he didn't send it. You did. What? No, I never. 10 years ago, when you died, you didn't just leak ledgers, Silas interrupted, leaning in close. You installed a sleeper virus in the syndicate's mainframe. A virus that would activate only when your specific biometric signature, your heartbeat, re-entered the estate. You were the Trojan horse, Elena. By coming back, you automatically handed the keys to the kingdom to me. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. The guilt was a suffocating weight. She had thought she was saving Dominic by running, but she had unknowingly left a ticking time bomb that would destroy him the moment he found her. Her love hadn't been a sanctuary, it had been his downfall. I didn't know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I swear, I didn't know. It doesn't matter, Silas said, pulling a laptop from the table. The virus is uploading the treasury codes now. Once the transfer is complete, the Gurrieo syndicate will be a shell. And Dominic? Well, a king with no money and no army is just a target. Suddenly, the heavy iron door at the top of the stairs blew off its hinges with a deafening roar. Smoke and dust filled the room. Through the haze, a figure emerged. Dominic. He was covered in soot, his expensive suit shredded, and blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. He wasn't carrying a gun. He was carrying a detonator. Let her go, Silas, Dominic said, his voice a low, vibrating growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cellar. You're too late, boy. Silas screamed, gesturing to the laptop. The transfer is at 90%. I have your money, and I have your woman. Dominic stepped further into the light, and for the first time, Elena saw a look of absolute, terrifying calm on his face. You think I cared about the money? I built that mainframe. I knew about the virus the day after she disappeared 10 years ago. The room went silent. Even Silas froze. You knew. Elena sobbed. I knew, Dominic said, his eyes locked on hers, filled with a raw, agonizing devotion. I didn't fix it because it was the only thing left of you in my world. I kept that virus alive for 10 years just to feel like you were still reaching out to me. And as for the money. He looked at Silas. That's not the treasury you're downloading. That's the location of every serpent safe house in Asia, being broadcast directly to the national police. Silas scrambled for the laptop, his face paling. No, you're lying. Check the screen, old man, Dominic said. As Silas looked down, the progress bar turned red. A single word appeared on the screen. Betrayal. In that moment of distraction, Julian lunged. He head-butted the guard holding him and snatched the gun. Clara, moving with lightning speed, drew a hidden blade and buried it in the shoulder of the other guard. Dominic didn't wait. He moved like a shadow, crossing the room in 3 strides. He didn't go for Silas. He went for Elena. He shielded her body as the room erupted into a final, desperate firefight. Bullets whizzed through the air, sparks flying off the metal chairs. Dominic's arms were around her, his heat a shield against the cold. I've got you, he whispered into her hair. I've always had you. But as the smoke cleared, the victory felt hollow. Silas was down, but as Dominic pulled back to look at Elena, he gasped. A dark red stain was spreading across his white shirt, right over his abdomen. Dominic! Elena screamed, reaching for him as his knees buckled. He collapsed into her lap, his blood staining the dress the color of spilled blood. He had taken a bullet for her. Again. Can you believe the sacrifice Dominic was willing to make? He knew the trap was there for 10 years and let it stay just to feel close to her. Tell me in the comments, is that true love or pure madness? And please, if you want to see if Dominic survives this, subscribe right now. We need every bit of hope for the next chapter. Stay with me, Elena pleaded, pressing her bound hands against his wound. Dominic, look at me. You waited 10 years. You can't leave me now. Dominic's eyes fluttered, a small, pained smile touching his lips. 10 years was worth it for one more day with you. The sirens in the distance sounded like a dirge as Julian and Clara scrambled to lift Dominic's heavy, limp body. The cellar was a tomb of smoke and the copper tang of blood. Elena felt like she was moving through deep water, her hands stained crimson, her heart shattering with every shallow, ragged breath Dominic took. We have to go. Now. Julian roared, hoisting Dominic's arm over his shoulder. They retreated through a network of tunnels beneath the warehouse, emerging into a desolate shipyard where a single speedboat waited. The rain had returned, a cold, mocking downpour that washed the blood from Elena's face but couldn't touch the ice forming in her chest. They reached a safe house, a crumbling clinic on the outskirts of the city run by a doctor who owed Dominic his life. As the doctor rushed Dominic into a makeshift surgery, Julian slammed the door shut, leaving Elena standing in the hallway, shivering and covered in the man she loved. "This is your fault," Clara hissed, her eyes wild with grief and fury. She paced the narrow corridor like a caged predator. He had a kingdom. He had peace. He spent a decade building a wall around his heart, and you walked through it and set everything on fire. "I never wanted this," Elena whispered, her voice a ghost of a sound. "It doesn't matter what you wanted." Clara stepped into her space, her finger jabbing at Elena's chest. "The council is in shambles. The police are raiding every Yeo asset because of that broadcast. Dominic is bleeding out on a plastic table, and the remaining serpent cells are hunting us. You aren't his queen, Elena. You're his curse." The words cut deeper than any blade. Elena sank onto a wooden bench, her head in her hands. She looked at her trembling fingers, the dried blood of the man who had waited 10 years for her flaking off her skin. Clara was right. Every time they were together, blood followed. An hour passed in agonizing silence, punctuated only by the clinking of surgical tools from behind the closed door. Finally, the doctor emerged, his face weary. "His stable, but barely," the doctor sighed, wiping his hands on a towel. "The bullet nicked an artery. He's lost too much blood. He needs a transfusion, but his blood type is rare, and we don't have the equipment to keep him hidden if his vitals drop again." "Take mine." Elena stood up instantly. "We're the same." "I know we are." The transfusion was a slow, haunting process. Elena lay on a cot next to Dominic, a tube connecting their veins. She watched his pale, still face, his chest rising and falling with the help of a respirator. As her blood flowed into him, she felt a strange, hollow peace. She was giving him back the life she had inadvertently stolen. But as night deepened, the darkness closed in. Julian burst into the room, his face grim. "They found us," he whispered. A tracker was embedded in Silas's laptop. "There's a convoy of serpents 2 miles out. We can't move Dominic in this state. If we stay, we all die. If we run, he dies." Elena looked at Dominic, then at the window where the headlights of the enemy were beginning to flicker in the distance. A cold, hard determination settled over her. She knew what she had to do. She knew how to end the curse. "Take him," Elena said, her voice steady for the first time in 10 years. "Take the boat at the back of the clinic. Julian, you and Clara get him to the harbor. I'll stay behind." "Are you insane?" Clara asked, her eyes widening. "They'll kill you." "They don't want to kill me yet," Elena said, standing up and pulling the needle from her arm. She ignored the sting. "They want the key. I'll lead them away. I'll give them a chase they can't ignore. It's the only way you'll have enough time to get him to the safe zone in the south." She walked over to Dominic one last time. She leaned down, pressing a lingering, heartbreaking kiss to his cold forehead. "You waited 10 years for me, Dominic," she whispered against his skin. "Now it's my turn to wait for you. In this life or the next." She turned to Julian, her eyes hard. "Go. If he wakes up and I'm not there, tell him I stayed hidden. Tell him the ghost finally found his peace." As the sound of the boat's engine faded into the rain, Elena stood alone in the middle of the dark clinic. She picked up a discarded flare gun and a handheld radio. She stepped out into the mud, the headlights of the serpent convoy finally rounding the corner. She was alone. She was terrified. And for the first time in a decade, she wasn't running. She was standing her ground for the only man who had ever truly seen her. Have you ever had to let go of someone you love just to keep them safe? Tell me your stories of sacrifice in the comments. I'm reading all of them. And please, if you're rooting for Elena to survive this impossible choice, hit that subscribe button. We're in the heart of the storm now. The lead car screeched to a halt. A dozen men with assault rifles stepped out, their lasers dancing across Elena's chest. She stood tall, the rain soaking her to the bone, a small, sad smile on her lips as she raised the flare gun to the sky. "You want the key?" she shouted into the wind. "Come and get it." The flare hissed into the black sky, a screaming orb of crimson light that illuminated the carnage of Elena's soul. She didn't run. She walked toward the center of the road, her hands raised, her eyes fixed on the lead vehicle of the Serpent convoy. The men swarmed her like a hive of hornets. They slammed her into the hood of a car, the cold metal jarring her bones. A man with a jagged scar across his throat, the Serpent's new enforcer, Elias Vane, stepped forward, gripping her hair and forcing her head back. "Where is he?" Elias hissed, the scent of cheap gin and decay wafting from him. "Where is the ghost?" "He's dead," Elena lied, her voice cracking but her gaze remaining steady. "He died in the cellar." "You're chasing a corpse, Elias. But I have the physical drive with the treasury keys. It's at the old cathedral in the North District. If you kill me, the encryption self-destructs in 30 minutes. It was a gamble, a desperate, thin thread of a lie. But greed was the Serpent's primary language. Elias signaled his men, throwing Elena into the back of a van. As they sped away from the clinic, Elena looked out the rear window, watching the small building disappear into the rain. She had bought him time. Meanwhile, on the choppy waters of the Han River, Dominic's eyes snapped open. He gasped, his hand flying to his side, his fingers clawing at the bandages. "Elena!" He wheezed, the word a ragged plea. "Don't move, Dominic," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion as he steered the boat. "The wound is open. You're losing blood again." Dominic grabbed Julian's collar with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for a man half dead. "Where is she?" "She stayed behind," Clara said, her voice small, her usual bravado stripped away. "She led them to the North District. She sacrificed herself so we could get you out." Dominic's face went through a terrifying transformation. The pain vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory focus that made even Julian flinch. He ripped the 4 line from his arm, the blood spraying onto his white shirt. "Turn this boat around," Dominic commanded. "Sir, you'll die before we hit the shore." "Then I'll die on my feet." Dominic roared, his voice echoing over the roar of the engine. "I spent 10 years waiting for her. I did not survive a decade of hell to let her be a martyr for a throne I never wanted. Turn the boat around." In that moment, the power shifted. The king was back, not for his empire, but for his heart. Back at the cathedral, Elena was pushed into the center of the dusty, abandoned nave. Elias held a knife to her throat. "The drive, Elena. Now." "It's behind the altar," she whispered, her heart hammering. "Under the loose stone." As Elias moved toward the altar, Elena closed her eyes, preparing for the end. She knew there was no drive. She knew that once he realized it, he would kill her. But then, a sound cut through the silence of the church. The heavy oak doors didn't open, they exploded. A black SUV roared through the entrance, drifting across the marble floor in a cloud of dust and tire smoke. The driver's side door flew open, and Dominic stepped out. He looked like a specter of death, pale, blood-soaked, and holding an automatic shotgun in each hand. "Dominic!" Elena gasped, her heart leaping with a mix of terror and pure, unadulterated hope. "Get away from her," Dominic said, his voice calm, steady, and utterly lethal. "You're a dead man walking, Yeo." Elias shouted, grabbing Elena and using her as a shield. "One move and she dies." Dominic didn't stop walking. He didn't even blink. "You think I'm afraid to die? I've been dead for 10 years, Elias. Tonight, I'm just here to make sure you join me." Suddenly, the stained glass windows shattered as Julian and Clara rappelled down on ropes, their suppressed weapons spitting fire. The serpent guards fell before they could even raise their rifles. In the chaos, Dominic didn't fire at Elias, he fired at the heavy chandelier chain above the altar. The massive iron fixture crashed down, creating a wall of fire and debris between Elias and the exit. Elena twisted in Elias's grip, biting his hand with everything she had. He yowled, dropping the knife. Dominic was there in an instant. He didn't use a gun. He tackled Elias into the altar, his fists moving in a blur of vengeful fury. Every hit was a decade of loneliness. Every strike was for the tears Elena had shed. When Dominic finally pulled back, Elias was a broken heap on the floor. Dominic turned to Elena, his breathing shallow, his face covered in sweat and blood. He reached out, his hand trembling as he touched her cheek. "I told you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm never letting you go again." "You came back," she sobbed, throwing her arms around him, mindful of his wounds. "You idiot, you came back for me." "Always," he said, pulling her close as Julian and Clara moved in to secure the perimeter. "For 100 years, Elena. I'll always come back." Do you believe that some people are just destined to be together, no matter how much the world tries to tear them apart? Tell me if you think Dominic's return was the ultimate act of love in the comments. And if you're ready for the final showdown and the justice these two deserve, you have to subscribe. The finale is coming up next, and you won't want to miss a single second. The turning point had passed. They were no longer the hunter and the hunted. They were a team. And as the sun began to rise through the shattered glass of the cathedral, painting the floor in hues of gold and crimson, Elena realized that the curse wasn't her. The curse was the life they had led, and today, they were going to end it. The sirens that once signaled a death sentence now brought the dawn of a different kind of justice. Because Dominic had leaked the evidence to the press and the highest levels of international law enforcement simultaneously, the local corruption that had protected the syndicate for decades crumbled instantly. As the authorities stormed the cathedral, they didn't find a mafia boss and a traitor. They found a man dying to protect a woman, and a woman who had saved the city from its own shadows. 1 year later, the air in the small coastal village in Jeju was thick with the scent of sea salt and blooming jasmine. It was a far cry from the exhaust and iron of Seoul. Here, the only sirens were the distant calls of gulls, and the only shadows were those cast by the swaying palms. Elena stood on the porch of a small, whitewashed cottage, her hands covered in soil. Her garden was finally a reality. Roses, lilies, and vibrant hydrangeas cascaded over the wooden fence. She wiped her forehead, a smile tugging at her lips as she heard the familiar sound of a gravel path crunching underfoot. Dominic walked toward her, moving with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the night at the cathedral, but he looked younger than he had 10 years ago. The hard, predatory edge of his face had softened into a rugged handsomeness. He was no longer the ghost. He was just a man who had finally come home. "You're late for lunch," Elena teased, stepping off the porch to meet him. Dominic didn't answer with words. He reached out, pulling her into his arms and burying his face in the crook of her neck. He smelled of fresh air and the expensive sandalwood soap she had bought him. "The boat took longer to secure than I thought. But it's ready. We can take it out to the cliffs tonight." He pulled back, his dark eyes searching hers. There was no more obsession there, only a deep, earned peace. They had both been pardoned under a witness protection agreement, their old identities erased, their past sins paid for in blood and the destruction of the council. "I still can't believe we're here," Elena whispered, her heart racing as it always did when he looked at her like that. "Sometimes I wake up and I'm afraid I'm still in that flower shop in the city, dreaming of a man who doesn't exist." Dominic reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. He took her hand, his fingers trembling slightly, a rare show of the vulnerability he only ever showed her. He slid a ring onto her finger. It wasn't the heavy gold band of a mafia prince. It was a simple, delicate platinum band with a single, brilliant diamond. "You don't have to dream anymore, Elena," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I waited 10 years to give you this life. I'll spend the next 50 making sure you never want to run again." Tears of pure joy finally spilled over Elena's lashes, tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. She laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, and threw her arms around his neck. Dominic lifted her, spinning her around in the golden afternoon light as the waves crashed gently against the shore below. Justice had been served, the monsters were gone, and the man who had waited a decade had finally found his queen, not in a palace of blood, but in a garden of hope. Thank you all so much for staying with us through this incredible journey of love and sacrifice. It's stories like these that remind us that no matter how dark the night, the morning always comes for those who refuse to give up on each other. I want to hear from you one last time. What was your favorite moment of Dominic and Elena's story? Was it the reunion in the rain, or the final stand in the cathedral? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please give us a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button to join our storytelling family. We have so many more emotional journeys to take together. Dominic took Elena's hand, and together, they walked toward the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, promising that for the first time in their lives, tomorrow would be even more beautiful than today.